I'm going to just start in something a little bit different this week. I want to just show a few pictures with the intention of asking you really just to hold these pictures in the mind as we, continue our conversation. This week we're going to look at Daniel chapter 3 as part of this series on solidarity, and it's the story of the three young men in the fiery furnace, in whatever it was, and to see if it has anything to say to our contemporary situation, a world in which things are pretty dangerous, both in terms of the violence in the world, the lack of human rights, the abuse of human rights, the way in which populism has overtaken, and bad becomes good and good becomes bad, a way in which language has shifted and changed. So here are some pictures, and just tell me what you know and what you think. It's not a quiz, but they're just some images that we can hold in mind as we continue our conversation. Do you know who this is? Leah Sharibu.
Hang on. Remind me.
Sorry, I don't.
Mentioned.
Yeah, she's somebody who was mentioned in the first of our Wednesday evenings by Julie Bicknell.
Mm.
She is a young Nigerian, and if you remember, 3 or 4 years ago, a group, Boko Haram, kidnapped about, I can't remember how many it was, about 100 girls from a school. I mean, a large number of girls from a school. And they were released once they'd said that they would become Muslim. But Leah Sharibu refused to convert to Islam, and so is still held, and is in a forced marriage, has had 2 children since then, but she refuses to give up her Christian faith. Here's 2 more pictures.
Oh, Rosa Parks.
Romero, my man.
You've got it. So,
Romero, there he is.
Yeah. Rosa Parks, who with Martin Luther King refused to sit at the back of the bus and sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, which really energized the civil rights movement in the 50s. Romero, who was assassinated, Archbishop of San Salvador, assassinated for his outspokenness against a dictatorship in defense of the poor of his country. Became known as Santo Romero de los Andes before he was made a saint. He was called Saint Romero of the Andes in Latin America. You know who that is? This is Dorothy Stang. Do you know of Dorothy Stang? She's a Roman Catholic sister, was a Roman Catholic sister, who challenged the loggers in Brazil who were destroying, and she was assassinated by the logging company in about, I think, 2005. And the person next to him is Pastor Roy, who is going to be our speaker tomorrow night in Union Chapel, who is from Hong Kong and organized Christians to stand between the police and the protesters during those protests in Hong Kong, and subsequently was maligned by the government, and he's now living in Britain as a refugee. So we'll hear from him tomorrow night. And this.
Charlie Chaplin, great dictator.
Got it. Alongside the Nuremberg rally.
Triumph of the will.
Triumph of the will.
Versus Triumph of the will.
There it is. So there's just some images, yeah, that I want us just to hold in mind as we read Daniel chapter 3. So it's just to kind of give a little bit of background before we move on. A little bit of background to the story that we're going to read. I mean, it's a court legend, and the first kind of 6 chapters of Daniel have these different legends, different stories that come from the Babylonian court in the 6th century. But they're stories that have kind of developed over the centuries, and they really didn't come into their final form until the Greek period, and around about 167, sort of 2nd century of BC. And so here we have the kind of 1st century, the 6th century story that is amended and adapted, and it's a story about King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the conqueror of Jerusalem, who reigned from 605 to 562. Although maybe slightly confused, the stories got kind of mixed up. I'll show you another image actually. This is there. This is a uniform. What do you call those? It's not a tablet. It's a round thing.
Steel,
Something. What do you call it?
Is it steel? Steel? S-T-E-L?
Something like that. Yeah, I think so. But it's from Al Yahudi, which is the sort of New Jerusalem. Is where the Jewish exiles, as you can tell from the name, the Jewish exiles were, and it tells of this period with this grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, this Nabonidus, who established a moon god, Sin, instead of the usual god that we know of Marduk, and he began this horrific cult in the temple of Haran. So that's sort of a little bit of background to what it was, and let's just have a look at just the first few verses of first 7 verses of Daniel 1, just to give the kind of background to the story. So, would you like to read?
Hello. Oh no, sorry. I'll just do the first one, and then any other readings I will open.
Be silent.
I will be silent, yes. All right, so Daniel 1:1-7. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar. Is it Nebuchadnezzar?
Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar, yeah.
King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord let King Jehoiakim of Judah fall into his power, as well as some of the vessels of the house of God. These he brought to the land of Shinar, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his gods. Then the king commanded his palace master, Ashpenaz, to bring some of the Israelites of the royal family and of the nobility, young men without physical defect and handsome, versed in every branch of wisdom, endowed with knowledge and insight, and competent to serve in the king's palace. They were to be taught the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the royal rations of food and wine. They were to be educated for 3 years, so that at the end of that time they could be stationed in the king's court. Among them were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah from the tribe of Judah. The palace master gave them other names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Misash. And Azariah he called Abednego. You're on mute.
This is just a background to the whole book, certainly to the first 6 chapters of the book, and you can see, I mean, what do you pick out about the sort of the context and the characters?
Well, they're from Judah originally.
Mm-hmm.
Now they have been kind of assimilated into the Chaldean society. I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to say too much, but yeah, there is there is something about roots in there which is quite important.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, in Jeremiah, Jeremiah's letter to the exiles was to seek the welfare of the city in which you are settled, and clearly they have sought the welfare of the city, but they have gained a position, a significant position, and later on you see Daniel gets an even more powerful position, and these 3 young men become governor of a province. So, and their names are changed. As you say, I mean, they're assimilated into this other society. But what gives them their individuality, and it's an absolutely, I think, quite classic situation.
It makes you wonder. I forgot. I'm not. It's a while since I've read the story, read Daniel, but it makes you wonder why you would do that. It's not an immediately obvious thing that you do, but when you invade a country, and then you sort of invite some of its people to become part of your court. I mean, it's not obviously clear why. But I mean, it may well be explained as the story unfolds, and I've forgotten exactly the outs of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Priti Patel, Rishi Sunak. I mean, in key situations, but having come to this country, yeah.
I suppose. But I mean, the thing is, it's kind of proven that they've brought their God with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to be kind of unfair to Priti Patel, but there seems to be a marked difference, in that they've assimilated here, but they've kind of brought their values with them.
Yes.
They've not kind of given up on their God. And actually, their God kind of helps them pull through, and helps them to kind of become powerful within the society.
Okay, so that's the kind of background. Let's go on to Daniel chapter 3. It's a long passage, so if you've got your own Bible, might want to keep it open, but we'll look at it on here as well. Now then, this is...
All right.
Hang on, what am I doing? Sorry, I haven't opened the right bit yet. Woo. There we go. Daniel 3, I should put here.
Me. Do you want to read?
Okay.
I'm opening the floor, but I'm also putting myself up for this because I know it's a long one. So
I mean, yeah. One of the things that has happened here is that Daniel and the other three young men have been assimilated into into the Babylonian bureaucracy.
Mm. Yeah.
They become servants of Nebuchadnezzar, and obviously they were sort of quite good at that sort of stuff because they got promoted quite a lot.
Mm. They become governor of somewhere.
Yeah.
Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Daniel remained at the king's court. Yeah. So they're governors of the whole province. Yeah. So, somebody going to read?
as I said, I'll put myself up for it. But if anyone wants to do it, they may.
Okay.
Peter, there you go.
How much do you want me to read? First 1 to...
Well, it's all of it. It's the whole chapter. So
Yep, that's fine. Yep.
Yep.
So, hang on. Where are we? Yep. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue whose height was 60 cubits and whose width was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent for the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the councillors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to assemble and come to the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the councillors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. When they were standing before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Accordingly, at this time, certain Chaldeans came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble shall fall down and worship the golden statue. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These pay no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your gods, and they do not worship the golden statue that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought in. So they brought those men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, and you do not worship the golden statue that I have set up? Now, if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, to fall down and worship the statue that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was so filled with rage against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face was distorted. He ordered the furnace to be heated up 7 times more than was customary, and ordered some of the strongest guards in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So the men were bound, still wearing their tunics, their trousers, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was so overheated, the raging flames killed the men who lifted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But the 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up quickly. He said to his counselors, "Was it not 3 men that we threw bound into the fire?" They answered the king, "True, O king." He replied, "But I see 4 men unbound walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the 4th has the appearance of a god." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their tunics were not harmed, and not even the smell of fire came from them. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. They disobeyed the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that utters blasphemy against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.
Fantastic.
Amazing story.
Story. Great reading. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, okay. Where do we begin with this one?
Wow. My first thought, it may be slightly off the tack, but that in the current situation, the current context, the golden calf is nationalism. And that sort of leapt out to me quite strongly, really, given all that's been going on the last few months and years in this country. And it's demanded that all of us fall down and worship this golden calf.
A golden statue.
Yeah, golden statue, sorry. Yeah.
I mean, in the previous chapter, chapter 2, remember he has a dream which Nebuchadnezzar has a dream which Daniel interprets, and it involves a statue with feet of clay and so on, which is all about the empires of the world. So this is a kind of continuation of that, and it seems the most likely statue is of Nebuchadnezzar himself, as opposed to an image of a divine image. So the idolatry is not idolatry in terms of a statue of a god, sort of idolatry which is ridiculed in Isaiah, but about the idolatry is turning temporal power into divine power, which is, exactly what you were talking about there in our modern world.
Yeah. And I've been doing a lot of reading recently about nationalism as a religion, and the fact that, well, I won't go into it, but there's very convincing arguments that nationalism is seen by a lot of people in terms of a religion, and that's why there's this single-minded concern that one adheres to nationalism.
I think, one thing just in background, that this is something that is not talking about Babylon. It's about Babylon, but it is talking about the situation Jews under in the Greek Empire. So it's a piece of propaganda. I mean, encouraging literature. But why, if you remember, I put in those pictures I showed at the beginning, a picture of Charlie Chaplin and the Great Dictator. Can you make a connection?
Well, I mean, Charlie Chaplin is mocking Hitler. He's mocking this kind of idea that a man can play God. That a human being can play God, and and also, I mean, there's obviously the stuff around the Jews. I mean, the persecution of the Jews in Nazi Germany is quite kind of obvious as well.
And he's using art as and comedy, as a way of undermining, debunking, the sort of fascist regime of Germany. So, and I sort of wonder whether or not, in the way in which this is written, whether or not there is a kind of debunking of that authoritarian regime. So the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the councillors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province, which you see that how many times, and then so it's kind of ridiculing this bureaucracy, how they're all coming together and worshipping this statue, this kind of monolithical kind of way in which society is ordered, and everybody just jumps and says and does what they're supposed to do. And then how they all bow down at the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the drum, and the entire music ensemble. I mean, kind of making a joke of the musicians that accompany this whole kind of authoritarian, kind of populist kind of spectacle that's going on there.
I mean, I've story told this bit, this part of the Bible, as you might expect. It's a story that people often want, in a way, but it's so easy to storytell it because of the rhythm in the lists, and it rings of a children's tale in a way. That's not to decry it, but just to point out the kind of ironic nature. It always, whenever I've told it, always makes me think of the King with No Clothes.
Yeah.
It has that same rhythm, and I, that may be just me, but maybe not from Peter's reaction. But it just, and that the irony that's there.
That came to my mind just before you said it. I thought, yes, it's the Emperor with No Clothes.
Yeah. And it's not obviously said because of the context within which it's written, but it clearly is mocking Nebuchadnezzar massively. And particularly in that list, he's got to have all these people around him all the time to make him be the king, make him be the emperor. And what happens? He's completely undermined. And what can he do in reaction? Only kind of do what he always does. I mean, I hate to say it, but he is Donald Trump. He only has one way to behave, which is, well, if their God then is more powerful, then anyone who doesn't worship that God's going to be torn limb from limb, completely missing the point entirely of what's going on here. But that's all he can do. That's all he knows. And I'd love to know how this is approached in synagogues, because it does feel a little bit like the story of Esther. That it would be like a pantomime telling this story. I don't know if that's true, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was.
The repetition is all the way through, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just that reading it endlessly, getting through the list of all the different,
all the musical instruments and
yeah.
It also reminds me of Gary Lineker this week, really, because huge reaction. One footballer, or former footballer, sends out one tweet, and there's a reaction as if the world had come to an end, and how could you possibly say things like that? And it's just so over the top. And again, it's very much like this, I think.
The government expects that the people will hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and the entire musical ensemble, and the BBC.
Wonderful.
and you get this, this worship the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. You know, so you get that 3 times. King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. You know, it's repetition is comic effect all the time. So you can imagine this story being told. I mean, it's a legend. It's not history, because it's sort of written down some centuries afterwards about a period of time, and it's a propaganda for its day and for ours. But nevertheless, it's a if you see it as that, not so much as a Sunday school story, but as a story for people living in an authoritarian regime, where you cannot be explicit about what you're talking about, so you have to find humor and comedy or some way of hiding it. As I mean, he wasn't there, but Charlie Chaplin managed to do with The Great Dictator, you know.
Exactly.
So what do you make of the fiery furnace then, and the 3 young men?
I have to say this. I always feel sorry for the people who threw them in.
Yeah. Yes.
I think that's very fair. But you know, I know it's a minor detail, but just strikes me that's not fair.
Well, if ever you see an advert for a job which involves throwing people into a fiery furnace,
Okay, fair enough.
Don't take it. You know?
Yeah, fair point. Maybe that's
the story. It's just to make the point of how hot the furnace was.
I know.
But it's
well, except they were people who were obeying Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So the contrast is between the people who follow, and if you do follow in an authoritarian regime, you know, if you follow in Nazi Germany, you and join the army and whatever, you might well end up in a fiery furnace.
Consequences.
You know?
Yeah, it's true.
And it's the ordinary people in those situations who end up, you know, dead, rather than, you know, the people who follow and the people who obey often find themselves in the firing line, in the wrong position, wrong place. But there is something about, you know, these 3 people, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I mean, they've got Hebrew names. They're in a community. They've got a position of power, and clearly they have, as Harley said, assimilated into that society, and they go along with a lot. So they reach a cutting point, don't they? They reach a tipping point. You know, we can go with this, we can go with this, we can go with this, but this is the stopping point. This is the point at which no further.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you know, a lot of people with a conscience, you know, they kind of do feel like, okay, there is something, you know, there are things that kind of you have to go along with just to get along with people and just to kind of live, you know, but there has to be that kind of cutting point, doesn't there? You know, I guess, and that's what's revealed here. It has to be there.
Yeah. And what is the cutting point, you know?
Absolutely.
Well, it's the worship.
No, until you're there.
Yeah, but here it's the worship. If you take Peter's analogy, it's the worship of nationalism, which I think is a valid analogy. I think that is what's going on here, really, isn't it? When does that get too much?
It's the heating of the furnace as well. I mean, you know, the boiling of a frog. You know, how do you boil a frog? You know, very slowly, and it's how is the furnace being heated up? You know, and this is the Gary Lineker thing as well. You know, I mean that you can't make a comparison between where we are now and Germany in the 1930s and 40s. But what Gary Lineker was saying was, actually, this is language that is reminiscent of that period,
Yeah.
the early part of the period, which led to.
Yeah.
And and for people in any of those situations, that you don't know how the authoritarianism is notched up, and they know how to do it.
Yeah, and there's another golden calf here, isn't there? That's that is a knee-jerk reaction to any mention of anything that might suggest a group of people are like Nazis in Germany. Where there's no thought behind it, because actually, Gary Lineker's may not be the most clever person by any means, but there was a subtle point in what he was saying, and a valid point. The use of language is very important. But we can't deal with that because, oh no, he said this thing. And that's beyond the pale. We've now got into the territory of another idol that we worship. And it's a fear.
But if you say you can never make a comparison with the Nazi era, then you're saying effectively that there's some eras of history that you can never learn from, because they're out of the ordinary. They're so in a world of their own, which they're not. That's a frightening thing. It could happen again.
Yes.
We need to be so constantly on the lookout for language and actions that can lead in that direction.
Yeah. I mean, my mum grew up in Berlin in the 30s.
Oh gosh.
So she used to talk about the fact that you didn't realize, you didn't know. You just thought this was, I mean, she was a child, so it's different, I suppose, in a way, but you just thought that it was okay to say all these things. And that's the danger. So I've always been aware of that. When there's a point at which you can't say something, there's something very wrong.
Yes. And it's like that pastor, I've forgotten his name, Nimola, who said, well, first they came for them, then they came for them.
Yeah.
No one left to speak for me. Well, that's the point, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And when it links to the demonization of a group of people, then it really is dangerous.
Yes.
What do you make of, here we are, verse 24 and 25. Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up quickly. He said to his counselors, was it not 3 men that we threw bound into the fire? They answered the king, true, O king. He replied, but I see 4 men unbound, walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the 4th has an appearance of a god.
Well, that's always supposed to be Jesus, isn't it?
I mean, but also, I mean, there is the kind of nationalism thing, but there's also, man trying to be God, isn't there? I mean, it's quite kind of, quite plainly written, that, King Nebuchadnezzar wants to be God. He wants to be a god himself, really.
Yes.
And so, and so rather than being confronted with a statue, I mean, now he's being confronted with someone who has the appearance of a god, and, he's calm, and, like no kind of statue compared to that. But also what God is standing alongside the people in this furnace here. He's with them.
I mean, it's interesting you say that is Jesus. I mean, that's obviously Christian interpretation. In verse 28, it says, Nebuchadnezzar said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And if we're talking about this sort of later period, this is when the idea of intermediaries between, humans and God comes into Jewish thinking. So, the angels and so on, it's a kind of later thinking, and this is a later book. But
if you were storytelling this, Neil, how would you explain this particular bit?
I wouldn't. I'd leave the story as it is, and I'm saying it's supposed to be Jesus, but I'm saying it that way because that's what I've been taught in my past. But I'm not saying it is. I think it's much more nuanced and mysterious than that. It's interesting that's what Nebuchadnezzar leaps to first, isn't it? Because he gets there very quickly.
Yes.
And I mean, I think he probably is right, but there are lots of things, because yes, I remember now. So I'm kind of mumbling a bit here because I think it's a long time since I have told it, but I did always emphasize has the appearance of a god,
Right.
and then kind of emphasize servants of the Most High God that Nebuchadnezzar said, because I felt that was quite a strong contrast. It's not what his counselor says. First, he says he looks like a god, but Nebuchadnezzar goes straight there. Why? Is it because he can only believe that a god would be better than him? I don't know. As a kind of thinking in my head that's what it is. No one else could defeat him. I don't, in a sense, I don't think it really matters from God's point of view who or what it is. It's part of God's purposes, but it's what's, I think. Sorry, if I'm carrying on too long, shut me up. But what I think is interesting is that this is really Nebuchadnezzar's story more than it is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're not characterized at all. They're blank canvases. You never get a sense of them as characters. I never do. I can't picture them really that well. They're a triplet, and I can't individualize them. But Nebuchadnezzar, I can picture in my head very easily, and I'm sure we all can. And it goes back to what Vaughan was saying earlier, that this is irony, that who is the focus of the story, and again I think we tell it wrong, because there's songs about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but actually we're missing the point.
But I do think, I mean, if you're looking at it as a piece of Jewish writing to encourage Jewish people in adversity, or as we read it as Christians, to encourage us in times of adversity, then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are the people we ought to identify with. I mean, I think the purpose of the story is to encourage people in tough situations. So again, at the beginning, I showed pictures of people who find themselves in tough situations.
Okay. Right.
And then, the question is, who is the fourth?
Right.
I mean, in Road to Emmaus, it's who is the third? Who walks ever beside us? That's T.S. Eliot. Who is the third person who walks on the road to Emmaus? T.S. Eliot. Who is the third who walks ever beside us?
Yeah, I get that.
And here it's the fourth. Who is the fourth? Who is the angel who is with us? And what is our experience of times of adversity, which says, yeah, we were there in this, but we were not alone in this.
Okay, I think that's the key, Vaughan. That's what I was going to kind of say. I think they may be faceless, which I do think in this story, but there are three of them and then four. And I think what this story emphasizes is that Nebuchadnezzar is on his own, even though, and perhaps that's part of the irony of the lists, even though he's surrounded by all these people, he is on his own. And I think, look at the horrible and abusive people in our pasts. Ultimately, they have been on their own.
I mean, he changes. Nebuchadnezzar changes, and he's convinced by the three young men. The word martyr, means, in Greek, means witness. And was it Tertullian who said, this seeds of the martyrs are the blood of the martyrs is the seed of Christians. And there's a sense in which, I think it's in the story, it's the bravery of the three men which convinces Nebuchadnezzar. And is it, bizarre thing. Go back to Gary Lineker, which is hardly a comparison, but just somebody saying it has brought out a whole level of support and opposition to support for refugees that no one realized was there. So just one witness, one testimony, actually goes out and makes a change. And there's something in just remembering it now, here in verse 16 and 17, they answer to the king. Yeah, they'll speak together, actually. You're right there, Neil. Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. Yeah. If our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods and we will not worship the golden statue that you've set up. So that's a definite no. But here it says, if our God, where is it? But if not, well, God can deliver them. Otherwise, God is not God.
Yeah.
So it isn't saying we're testing God here.
Yeah.
But it's actually saying if God does not choose to deliver us at this point, then we still will not worship. So there is a kind of choice that these young men have. You know, they trust in God to deliver, but they still, as Jesus did, you know, put it in God's hands as to whether or not that deliverance actually happens.
They still they trust God even if the deliverance didn't happen, which is quite key. And they stood by God and His ways, and, you know, against the kind of injustice of Nebuchadnezzar. You know, even. But I mean, another interesting thing. I don't know. Don't want to bring it too much to Jesus, obviously, because this isn't about Jesus. But I mean, Jesus on the cross, He cries out to God. He's like, "Why have you forsaken me?" You know, just. I mean,
but He's not saying God doesn't exist, and He's not turning against God at that point.
No, but He is saying, "Why would you leave me now?"
Yeah,
and they mock Jesus, don't they? He trusted in God, let Him deliver him.
Yeah. But I think this is the fundamental difference, isn't it? That basically the three of them say, whatever God does, God is God, and that doesn't make any difference. Won't change anything. Nebuchadnezzar can only believe that there is power if it involves violence. So he doesn't have an understanding of power without violence.
Yes.
Because he doesn't really change.
No.
He only changes in terms of where his focus is.
It must have been quite compassionate about God sending an angel, isn't it? You know? You hope God will send an angel. Sometimes,
nice.
you know. Yeah. Yeah, I need an angel. Yeah, I mean, and do we get that sense of rescue? Yeah, do we get that sense of rescue?
Yeah.
So, is this a contemporary story? Does it speak to our contemporary world, and if so, how?
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think it definitely does.
All of the whole Bible does, really, though. I mean, my reading of the Bible, I've found a story that doesn't have some kind of modern application, you know. And I mean, I go on about the same books because I've not read it enough lately. So I go on about the same books, but you know, it's, Jeremiah has a lot.
Yeah.
There's a connection between Daniel and Jeremiah, I think, as well.
Yes.
But, I mean, but it's the kind of humility of Jeremiah, isn't it? It's like, no, we're not. We're done for. Come on, we got to realize that we're not. You know, that God can't save us this time.
But it doesn't stop God being God.
No, I mean, the thing I really like about about the book is that it's a picture of a completely bureaucratized state. And that should have a certain resonance for us nowadays.
Unable to follow God because it's kind of.
But sorry, Harley, what did you say?
I said the state is unable to follow God because it's kind of labyrinthine bureaucratic ways, you know. It's confused.
Yeah. And I think that sense in which there comes a point where you can go along with stuff, even if it's not quite right, or you can take a role in society, and you should take a role in society. But there has to be sticking points, you know. There have to be things, and I wonder about, you know, the position of the church in, you know, in modern society. You know, you've got the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the councillors, the treasurers, the justice, the magistrates, you know, the bishops, the archbishops, you know, the priests, and, you know, all the rest of it. You know, I mean, where does the church find itself? Because Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and Daniel himself could have been in that list.
Yeah.
You know, they in at certain points they were in that list. You know, according to the legends, but at another point they have to stand out. So three of them find themselves in the fiery furnace, and another one in the lion's den. You know.
You say, where's the church in all this? And one of the things that comes to my mind on that is the forthcoming coronation, because they're going to use the Old Testament in totally unjustifiable ways as part of the service, and he's going to be anointed and all sorts of things. And that's the church taking on a role and making claims for the monarch, which really, I think, are wrong.
Interesting today, Peter. We got an email actually from the Congregation Federation, but it was from the Council of Churches Together in England. Yeah, calling for a period of prayer leading up to the coronation.
Right.
You know, and they're sending out, you know, sort of whole sets of prayer packs and stuff for that. And, you know, you kind of, I mean, my kind of Congregationalist, you know, roots keep telling me, remember Charles I.
Yeah.
And what we did to him. You know, I mean, it's just a question of whether or not, at what point the church has to say we'd rather be in the fiery furnace than in the falling down whenever the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and the entire musical, you know, lot start playing.
Does the church stand in the furnace, or does it stand with power?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a good sermon starter. Yeah, definitely.
Well, there's the question. I mean, that's might be the point to end. I mean, that's, you know, that really is the question for the book, isn't it? And the answer that comes to me in the story, the answer is that you can stand, you know, with the whole thing up to a certain point, and at a certain point at which you can't, and the point at which you can't sends you up in that fiery furnace, and it's the witness of that fiery furnace that is going to be the change of heart in the heart. You know, at the end of the day, it's you know, it's that which makes a change. Yeah.
And I know Gary Lineker wasn't in a fiery furnace, but there's an encouragement there, isn't there?
Yeah.
That it didn't go the way that those in power thought it would.
Yes.
And they've been exposed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hey ho.
Wow.
How's that?
Who thought we'd all get all of this out from Daniel 3?
Yeah, maybe we should send the recording to Gary.
Yeah, maybe we should. He'd probably find it quite fun.
No, Christian, is he?
Not as far as I know. I don't think so. Well, who knows?
It might be, but I mean, you never know. I mean, we were looking at, but certainly he's not just disinterested. He's accommodated, I think, 2 refugees in his own
Yes,
home.
that's
Yes.
right.
You know,
Yes.
he's somebody who's not just speaking for the sake of speaking. He's speaking out of his own.
He's earned his right.
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely.